Hi there everyone. Right, today we're going to look at solving one-step equations. Okay, we're going to do it in three different sections. We're going to look at adding and subtracting first, then we're going to look at multiplying, and then we're going to look at dividing. And that'll make more sense as we look at examples. But when we're talking about one-step equations, effectively all that means is I've got one step to do. So it should be relatively straightforward, and it's a concept that is basically the introduction to solving equations. There are two-step equations. There are two-step equations involving brackets, and there are equations that involve powers. There are other videos, but this is really the very first step in terms of solving equations. So this is your starting point. So it's really important you get this bit right because everything else kind of builds on top of it. All right. So to solve an equation, what we're effectively trying to do is trying to get the letter on its own. All right. It tends to be X. You'll come across that an awful lot in kind of textbooks, but of course it can be any letter. It doesn't really matter. It's about finding an unknown at the end of the day. Right. So in order to do this, you kind of need to work backwards using what we call inverses. Or the opposites if you want. Okay, so for example, if I've got a plus, the opposite that would be take away. If I've got a multiply, the opposite that would be divide, and so forth and so forth. All right, so we're going to go through all those examples today and make sure we cover every single element of those so you understand it in a bit more depth. All right, so if you were asked to solve, all right, now you might be able to do this in your head, and I'm sure many of you probably can, to solve x plus 7 equals 9. So what we're after is obviously trying to figure out what the value of x is. And like I said, most of you will probably be able to look at that and probably realise what that value is. But this is not about just kind of doing everything in your head. This is about a process which will be built on for you to kind of develop further skills. Okay, so what we're really looking to do is we're looking to do the inverse of this plus 7, all right, because we're trying to isolate x on its own. So what we're trying to get to is x equals something. All right. Now, like I said, some of you already know what that is. I won't say it, but some of you will obviously try and figure that out. But what I'm after is the step process. All right. So if I'm going to do this plus 7, I'm going to do the inverse of this, or the opposite, to this side. All right. So essentially what you're doing, you're going to take away 7 from this side and this side, because what you've got is this is an equation where this equals this. So whatever I do to this side, I've got to do the same to this side. So if I remove this 7 or take away this 7, then I've got to take away the 7 from the other side. All right. So you'll see this kind of step written down where you see the plus 7 go across and it becomes a minus 7. All right. What we're essentially doing is you're taking away the 7 from the left-hand side and therefore taking it away from the right-hand side. All right. So that's what happens. Okay. So you've got x equals 9 minus 7. And of course, we now know that x equals 2, which I'm sure many of you would have obviously figured out already. But it's that step process that we're after. To get x on its own, we need to do minus 7 from both sides of the equation, which is what I kind of mentioned what it says there. All right. So let's look at one more example in the opposite way. So if I've got a negative, well, if I'm doing the inverse of a minus or take away, then I need to add. All right. So this idea of thinking, well, if I've got a minus on this side, I'm going to do the inverse to this side. All right, so see that written down. So the inverse of minus 5 is plus 5. So that minus 5 is going to come across to the other side like so, and it's going to come a plus. All right, so it's going to be 7 plus 5, which equals 12. All right, so going back to the question, if you think about it, 12 minus 5 is 7, isn't it? All right, and it's quite easy to see what kind of gone on there. All right, so that is a one step. All right, it is literally one step in an equation. You're taking one element and moving it across. All right, and because this is adding and subtracting, it's relatively straightforward. All right, please do go to maths-school.co.uk for some practice on that. But I'm going to move on to multiplying and dividing now, because essentially they are the similar kind of skill set. So we might as well kind of cover it off while we're here. All right, so multiplying. So first of all, a fraction line means divide. All right, and hopefully you're aware of that. But ultimately, when I look at 1/2 or 1/2, that means 1 divided by 2. So the inverse of divide is multiply. All right, so you've got two things kind of going on there. So let's have a look at an example. So if I've got y over 6 equals 4, what I'm trying to figure out is what is the value of y. Okay, it's currently divided by 6. So the inverse of that would be multiply by 6. So what I'm going to do is going to take this 6, and if I multiply this side by 6 to get rid of it, then I've got to multiply this side by 6. And what you'll see is the 6 will come across to this side and become a times, because before it was a divide. All right, so there you go. It was divided by before, and then it's now gone to the other side and become a times because it's the inverse. All right, and I'll just repeat. we are literally timesing both sides by 6. That's why that disappears, and that's why that goes up there. All right. So what is the value of y? Well, y is therefore 24. And if you think about the question, what is 24 divided by 6? Well, of course, it's 4. All right. So we've got the solution to it. So same process for this one. Well, I've got something divided by 8. Now, again, some of you will be able to do it in the head, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is that you are timesing this side by 8 to get rid of this divide by 8. All right. So there you go. Write in a slightly different way. So v is equal to 2 times 8, and therefore v equals 16. Now, this process here of showing those steps is something that you need to kind of embed. It needs to stay with you. This is not just about getting the answer, like most of maths, unfortunately. This is about the step-by-step process of how you've achieved it, how you've got there. All right, so now this is only one step, but like I said, there's going to be 2 steps. There's going to be 2 steps with brackets and all those kind of different things. You need to make sure you get this bit right because everything else will be built on this. All right, okay. So let's look at dividing. It's very, very similar to multiplying. It's going to be the other way around. So if a number and letter are next to each other, then they are multiplied. That's something you'll have learned before. But the inverse of multiplication is, of course, division. All right. So if you've got something times x, and that's what that means, which is what we were talking about over here, that's 4 times x equals 20. Well, the inverse of times is divide. So I need to divide this by 4 because remember it's x I'm trying to isolate. So I'm going to move the 4 to there and become divide. You can write it as a fraction if you wish. You're going to put over 4, not a problem. But we are going to do 20 divided by 4, which of course is 5. All right, so if I go back to the question, is 4 times 5 20? Of course it is. All right, so that's that bit done. All right, so let's have a look at one more. Relatively straightforward example again. So you've got 6y equals 36. So that's 6 times y equals 36. So I need to divide this by 6 to get y on its own. Therefore, I need to divide this by 6 as well. And there you can see it starting to write down this process of step by step by step. So y equals 36 divided by 6. Therefore, y is going to be 6. All right. So I mentioned it in the previous part. This is what the step that you need to get you to. And you'll notice again, I go down the page. Down the page. All right. Not across, not all over the place. Nice, easily. The y stay in the same place. Things will move around it. And we keep it nice and structured as well. All right, so that's one-step equations. You probably want to go to maths-school.co.uk. The link is at the bottom, and get a bit of practice on it, get comfortable with it. And then once you've done that, what you might want to do is look at 2-step equations, which obviously is the next part of this kind of learning. And again, there is a video available on that if you need to kind of move on. Okay, well, thanks for listening.